Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the second annual President's Forum on Conflict and Conflict Transformation. I am Al Smith, Interim President of Utah State University, and I want to thank both our in-person and online audiences, and especially welcome our Utah State students. It's good to see so many of you here today. The purpose of this forum is to foster a culture of respect, open-minded inquiry, and thoughtful dialogue, empowering participants to navigate conflicts as opportunities for academic and personal growth. As Utah State's land-grant university, we have a special mission to educate and serve the public while nurturing understanding, empathy, and collaborative discourse. This annual forum on conflict transformation helps us fulfill this mission and meets the needs of communities in Utah. And before we begin today, I'd like to address a few important issues. First, Utah State University is committed to safeguarding freedom of expression and the robust exchange of ideas within our campus community. This includes safeguarding a speaker's right to engage in protected speech without disruption and interference. This means that during today's event, substantial disruption is not permitted and will result in an individual being removed from the event. And second, while we're talking about disruption, at this time I kindly ask you to make sure that all mobile devices are in silent mode. Today's event has been planned for nearly a year. I want to thank those that serve on the steering committee and also our forum operations teams who have worked hard to make this event possible. I'd like to ask members of those two teams to stand and be recognized, please. Today we have the opportunity to hear from a renowned leader who will share how the U.S. Constitution's foundational principles of negotiation and compromise can provide pathways to address the increasing polarization facing the United States. Following our special guest's remarks, we will delve further into the topic with a panel discussion inspired by questions from you, our in-person and online community. Now, it is my distinct honor to introduce our featured guest, Judge Thomas Griffith. Judge Griffith brings to us an extraordinary depth of experience and insight, drawn from a career marked by distinguished public service and legal scholarship. His journey has taken him from the bench of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit, where he served with distinction, to the heart of our nation's legislative process as the Chief Legal Officer of the U.S. Senate. Additionally, he has shaped legal matters as General Counsel at Brigham Young University. Today, he continues to contribute to the legal landscape as a lecturer on law at both Harvard and Stanford, a fellow at BYU's Wheatley Institute, and special counsel at Hunton Andrews Kurth. Judge Griffith's voice resonates powerfully in discussions on constitutional law and the preservation of the rule of law, both domestically and internationally. His commitment to impartial public service is further evidenced by his membership on former President Biden's Commission on the Supreme Court and his unwavering support for bipartisan judicial confirmations. We are privileged to have Judge Griffith with us this afternoon, and I invite you to join me in extending him a warm welcome.
Well, thank you, President Smith. I noticed there was a bit of a catch in your voice. All right, can we get him some water? I think. No, I'm really honored to be here for so many reasons. I've been treated so well, and love Utah State, love my friends who are here. Had a highlight moment in my life this morning. I got to spend some time with Bronco and actually talk to the football team. It was awesome. I loved it. So very grateful to be here. Now I'm going to warn you, I'm a real low-tech person. I use a fountain pen, and I'm going to try something that is new to me. I'm actually going to be the one that controls the slides. So be patient with me if this. But I'm grateful to be here, but I want to start off with some bad news. Should we get the bad news out of the way first? We'll end on a more positive note, but let's start with the bad news. The bad news, and it's nothing new to you, is that the United States is politically polarized. But here's the bad news, it may be news to you, that it's politically polarized in ways that it has never been before. In fact, we face an existential crisis. The polarization is so great, and there's much work to do. We're going to talk about the work to be done today. Arthur Brooks comments on this on our time, and he reminds us that political scientists find that our nation today is more polarized than it has been at any time since the Civil War. Now, here's what's different about the polarization we're experiencing today than the polarization we experienced in the last several decades. And it's a fancy phrase that political scientists call affective polarization. And that's what's new, the level of affective polarization. Here's my understanding of affective polarization. Your hatred for the other side is what really animates your political involvement. It's not just that you think that the other side has bad tax policies, but you actually hate them. That's new. That level of contempt in our American politics is new. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not talking about disagreement. Disagreement is not bad. Disagreement is very good. It's vital to our democracy. I'm an American. I disagree about everything, okay? And that's good. I want to know that every decision that's made by any decision maker in America is the product of disagreement, whether that's in the White House, the Supreme Court, Capitol Hill, church headquarters, or my pastor's office, right? I want to know that reason and disagreement has been applied to the decisions that are being made. So let's start off by understanding we're not talking about getting rid of disagreement. It's the way we're disagreeing today that's new and that it's dangerous. It's contempt that has entered into our public discourse, and that contempt is a cancer on the body politic. Just let me give you one little factoid that the social scientists have revealed for us to show you the danger of this. Over 70% of Republicans think that Democrats are immoral. Once again, not just that they have bad tax policies, that they do. No, that's a joke. I'm not partisan. That's a joke. That's a joke. It's not just that they have bad tax policies, but that they're immoral. Now, on the flip side, over 60% of Democrats think the same about Republicans. Both those numbers are up 20% since 2016. Social scientists tell us that the level of enmity and contempt among and between political parties today in America is comparable to the level of enmity between Protestants and Catholics in Northern Ireland during the Troubles. Now, we're not used to thinking of ourselves that way, but that's where we are in the United States of America today. Richard Haass of the Council on Foreign Relations wrote a book about American foreign relations a couple years ago, and in it, he said that in his view, the greatest threat to United States foreign policy today is not Putin, although he thinks Putin is a huge threat, right? He says the greatest threat to American foreign policy today is not China, although he thinks there are great dangers there. Richard Haass, Council on Foreign Relations, says that the greatest threat to American foreign policy today is this contempt that we have. It's an existential crisis. Now, there are many sources of it, many sources of this. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I'll just mention that the chief culprits of it are cable news, talk radio, and social media. Now, we have students here. I'm an old man, and I don't like your music, and I want you to get off my yard, okay? So you're going to be hearing some of this, but you're going to be hearing, no, if you're getting your information from social media, I'm not going to be so crazy as to say don't do that, although you shouldn't. I'm not going to say that. What I'm going to say to all of us is you're being played. I mean, you know that, right? It's being carefully curated. There is not breaking news every 10 minutes in the world except on cable. And the reason it is there because it's the way to get eyes on screens. It's a way to increase revenue on ads. That's what it is about. So if that's where you're getting your source of information, be careful. Arthur Brooks, once again, refers to this as the outrage industrial complex. And he says the outrage industrial complex in American media profits handsomely from our addiction to contempt. Okay, are you depressed enough yet? Got one more, worse for you. Come with me. We're going to get some good news on the other side, but here's some more bad news. Jonathan Haidt, social psychologist at NYU, written some of the most important work about letting lay people understand what's going on in the breakthroughs of neuroscience and why people think the way they do. He's not somebody that's given to excess and hyperbole, yet a couple of years ago, this is what he said. There's a very good chance that we will have a catastrophic failure of American democracy because we just don't know what a democracy looks like when you drain all trust out of the system. I think you do. I'm going to disagree with the great Professor Haidt. He said that about 6 years ago. I think since then we know what it looks like when you drain all trust from the system. Looks a lot like January 6th. When people lose faith and confidence in their institutions, they do crazy things. Okay, enough of that. Good news. Ready for some good news? It's a pretty day outside. Mountains are awesome with the snow on it, blue sky. Here's the good news. The good news is that over 90% of Americans are tired of this situation. They're tired of it. The other good news is that last night, only 6 million people out of what, we got 350 million in the country, something like that? Out of our population of 350 million people, last night, only 6 million people watch cable news. That's good news. I wish it was much lower than that, but I'll take that. So we're going to take the good news. Most Americans, the overwhelming majority of Americans, are sick and tired of this, and not everyone is consuming their information from curated sources whose sole purpose is to create outrage. So what I'm going to do in the next couple of minutes is, what can we do to build trust in our democracy? What are the things that you and I can do right now? And I'm going to start with something easy, then I'm going to move to something a little harder, and then we're going to finish with the hardest, right? The very hardest and the most important. Let's start with the easy one. I'm only going to spend a minute on this, okay? The first thing that we can do is build trust in our election administration system. So the next time you are at dinner with your Aunt Millie or your cousin Billy and they say the 2020 election was stolen, you need to tell them in the kindest, gentlest way that that's not the case. This has reference to a report I wrote with 2 other former federal judges appointed by Republican presidents. We did a deep dive in the 2020 election, and I'll just give you the summary of it. You can go online and find it. Lost, not stolen, the conservative case that Trump lost and Biden won the 2020 election. No, Trump did lose the election. Biden won. We know exactly what happened. There's no mystery to it all. There's no fraud in there's no fraud in the election that changed the vote in any precinct of America. I'll talk to you about it at the reception afterwards if you want to go into detail, but it's really important. It's really important that we understand that our election administration system, while not perfect, is really, really, really good, transparent, and trustworthy. Okay, that's easy. Can you do that? That's easy. Next dinner, just say them, go online, see what Griffith wrote, see what they think of it. That's all you need to do. Okay, the next one's a little bit harder, but it's critically important. It's become more important in the last couple of months, and that is to build confidence in our judicial system. So for 15 years, I served on the D.C. Circuit. That's me up on the bottom row on the left, not quite so gray, a little bit thinner than now. So for 15 years, I was on the United States Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit, a pretty significant court in the scheme of things. Never once in those 15 years did I see any of these people who had been appointed by presidents from Carter through Trump. Never once did I see any of them cast a vote that was in any way tainted by their partisan priors. No one was in there saying, I want to win one for Trump, or I want to stick it to Obama. Judges, they don't think that way. Now, pundits think they do. Senators think they do. Presidents think they do, but I'm telling you, they don't. I never saw it once. Okay. And the story I'm telling you about the D.C. Circuit, so maybe I'm crazy, maybe it's a unique place, I don't know, maybe I'm deluded, I don't know. I'm telling you what I saw. Justice Stephen Breyer recently retired from the Supreme Court. 28 years on the Supreme Court. He wrote lots of dissents. He was in the dissent frequently. Justice Stephen Breyer says the same thing about his experience on the United States Supreme Court. He said, nobody's in there trying to win one for the Republicans or stick it to the Democrats. He says, that's not what we're doing. We're arguing about law. We're arguing about how to interpret the Constitution, but we're not arguing for Republicans and Democrats. A year ago, I had the experience, the pleasure of interviewing Justices Sotomayor and Barrett in front of the National Governors Association in Washington, D.C. 41 of the nation's governors were assembled there. And I interviewed them about how the Supreme Court works. And guess what? These are two justices who disagree frequently, right? They said the same thing that Justice Breyer said. They said the same thing that he said. He said, we're not there doing politics. We're there doing law. And none of the justices on the Supreme Court questions the good faith of the other. So we are in a moment in time where we have criticisms directed to the judiciary. We have loose language saying judges who you disagree with are, here's a quote, judicial insurrectionists. You've heard that one. Or that we're experiencing a judicial coup, or that the court is illegitimate and that the judges ought to be impeached. I'm telling you, I'm standing as a witness for you, that does not describe the judges in the federal judiciary. Do some make mistakes? No question that happens. But we have a system in place when a judge makes a mistake, his or her decision gets reviewed, right, at a couple of levels. And so this loose talk that's out there right now is damaging because it undermines the public's confidence in something in which they ought to have supreme confidence, and that's that our federal judiciary is comprised of men and women who are committed to doing impartial justice. They're not there to do politics. Okay, so that's the second assignment. That's a little bit harder, right? You need to know a little bit more about that. That's a little bit harder, but I think it's critically important. Okay, let's get to the really hard stuff. Okay, let's see. There you go. The really hard stuff. About a year ago, Yuval Levin, a scholar at the American Enterprise Institute, published a book. Let's see. Here it is. It's called American Covenant, How the Constitution Unified Our Nation and Could Again. For what it's worth, I think it's the most significant book on the United States Constitution that I've ever read. And let me tell you a little bit about what Professor Levin says. He has come up with a new way to conceive of what the Constitution is and what it requires of us. His way is actually not new. It's actually what James Madison thought and what the first third of the Federalist Papers discuss, but it's something that we've forgotten over time. According to Levin, and I think he's right on this, the most important function of the Constitution is not to protect our rights. That's really important, and I'm all for it. Let's protect those rights that are in the Constitution. I'm all for it. But Yuval Levin is telling us there's actually something that precedes that and importance and is every bit as important as protecting our rights. He points out that the most important function of the Constitution is that it creates a structure of government that tells us how to act together when we disagree. It creates a framework for dealing with our differences. Now, we all know we're not governed by strict majority rule, but we're governed by a complicated arrangement with institutions selected by different constituencies in different ways. The House of Representatives is selected in one fashion by one group of people at a certain time, the Senate by a different group of people at a different time, the presidency yet another, Supreme Court chosen by other folks. It's very complicated. It's very complicated. And we know that without a supermajority, unless you get a supermajority in the Congress and the presidency, something that rarely happens anymore, the only way you can get things done under our constitutional structure is by building coalitions, negotiating, and bargaining. When you win an election, you don't win a mandate to get everything you want. What you win is a seat at the negotiating table. That's what the framers had in mind with the Constitution. And so the most important function of the Constitution, according to Levin, is that it serves as a means of fostering cohesion and common ground. Its structure compels Americans to be a little more accommodating of one another. It gives us practical experience in living and acting together. The Constitution requires a citizen who is willing to negotiate, and to compromise, or as Dallin Oaks puts it, on contested issues, we should seek to moderate and to unify. I have never come across a more powerfully accurate description of what it means to be a citizen of the United States. You want to support and defend the Constitution? I do too. Well, then don't wave your pocket copy of the Constitution in front of me. I've got mine right here. So it looks like it's all worn out. You got to get one. Don't pull one out of your pocket that doesn't look like it's worn out, right? So it's all worn out. But don't tell me that you're going to support and defend the Constitution because you're going to protect gun rights. I've got some great opinions that you'll love if you're a gun rights person. Don't tell me that you're going to support and defend the Constitution because it's all about religious liberty. I've got some great opinions I can show you that I've written about religious liberty or equal protection or the others. Those are all important. They're not as important at this moment or in any moment as the idea that the way to support and defend the Constitution is that on contested issues, we seek to moderate and to unify. That's what the Constitution anticipates. John Woods put it this way: the true project of democracy is not winning an election. It's living with each other regardless of whether we win or lose. That is the essence of the politics the Constitution creates. Now, there's something else interesting about the Constitution, and that's the way it was created. I'm now going to rely on the scholarship of a young scholar named Derek Webb, who teaches at the law school at Catholic University. He did a law review article a decade or so ago that was called The Original Meaning of Civility, colon, always have to have a colon in a law review article, colon, democratic deliberation at the Philadelphia Constitutional Convention. And here's what Webb came up with. We all know the story, we're familiar with the story, that in July, the Constitutional Convention wasn't doing well. It was on the brink of failure. Some of the delegates were packing their bags and ready to leave Philadelphia. And yet we know that by September, they had succeeded. They had created a constitution. Many people refer to this as a popular history at the time as the miracle at Philadelphia, that it was a miraculous thing that happened. Well, I'm a Christian. I believe in miracles. And the way I understand miracles is it's something that defies rational explanation. Walking on water, changing water to wine, raised from the dead, those sorts of things. Defy rational explanation. By that definition, no miracle happened at Philadelphia in 1787 because we know exactly what happened. We know exactly how they did it, and we know that because the great man, George Washington himself, told us. In the letter transmitting the Constitution to the Continental Congress, he wrote this: "The Constitution is the result of that spirit of amity and that mutual deference and concession which the peculiarity of our political circumstances rendered indispensable." What does that mean? Well, Derek Webb wanted to know what it meant, so he did a deep dive into the proceedings of the Constitutional Convention, and here's what he came up with. Here's what he thinks Washington was referring to in talking about the spirit of amity, mutual deference, and concession. First thing, he took a look at the rules of the convention, and they work in an interesting way. First of all, the first rule was if you were a delegate and you were in Philadelphia, you had to show up at Independence Hall. You had to be there, mandatory attendance. If you weren't there, they'd send the sergeant-at-arms to drag you there. Okay, that's the first thing. Second rule that he looked at is the rule was when someone held the floor, when someone was speaking, the other delegates couldn't talk. Well, that's just being polite, right? Couldn't talk, but they also couldn't read or write or do work at their tables. That was forbidden. And if they did, their knuckles got rapped, I presume. The last rule he took that is there was no record taken of the votes, no official record taken of the votes, which meant in July, when Proposition 8 came in front of you, X came in front of you, you could say, I'm against that. But then when it came back around a couple of weeks later in a slightly different form, you could say, I'm for that. I was against it, but now I'm for it. And no one would primary challenge you, calling you a flip-flopper, right? Webb says, put those rules together, and here's what you've got. You've got this interesting ethic that was going on at the Philadelphia Convention, and that was the idea that if you get a small group of people together in a room and they listen to one another, they will change their minds. And that's a good thing. That's how this Constitution was created. You want to preserve the Constitution, you do that. You don't do that, you're not preserving the Constitution. Okay, that's not the only thing Webb looked at. Something else he discovered important was that they socialized together a lot. Turns out there weren't many places for lodging or eating in Philadelphia that summer, so it turns out the delegates end up sleeping 2 or 3 in a bed. They got to know each other very well. And then they would work each day from 9, 10 in the morning till 4 in the afternoon, and Monday through Saturday. And then they would go to a tavern and have dinner. And there weren't many taverns, so they end up eating at the same place. After a couple of weeks, they formed dinner groups. Isn't that cute? They formed dinner groups. But the dinner groups weren't along ideological lines or regional lines. You could be from South Carolina and be in a dinner group with a person from Massachusetts. And you know what you found out? They're not so bad. They're not so bad. They got to know one another. At key points throughout the summer, Benjamin Franklin would open his home. He had a nice home in Philadelphia. Would open his home for parties. He had apparently the best collection of port wine on the East Coast, and he brought it out. And the libations flew, and the sense of conviviality was in the air. They had a great party time together. They got to know one another. Now, in spite of all these rules and all this socializing, it still wasn't going too well in July. It was on the brink of failure. What Webb points out is, at that moment of maximum peril, 11 moderates. What's the line from Hamilton about immigrants? They get the job done. Moderates, they get the job done. 11 moderates met at Franklin's home, and they made a critical decision that saved the Constitution. They decided that they were going to compromise for the sake of unity before they knew the terms of the compromise. Now, I tell my law students, that is legal malpractice if you're representing a client and you're going to go and negotiate. No, you don't do that. You don't do that. But they were interested in something more than that. They were interested in union. They made some difficult compromises, and I'm not here to defend any of them. We could have another session on that. The point is, they were willing to compromise for the sake of unity before they knew the terms of the compromise. They were willing to give up some really significant things they thought important to them because they wanted to create unity. That is how the Constitution was created. I believe it's the only way it can be preserved. Ultimately, preserving the Constitution turns out to be a matter of the heart. Our greatest president at the moment of maximum national peril, Abraham Lincoln, taught us this principle. While states are seceding from the Union, he stands on the steps of the Capitol at his first inauguration and utters these words, which are surely part of the American secular scripture, right? We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. So that's our work. It's not going to happen in Washington. It's not going to happen by you and me waiting for someone else to come to the rescue. It's not going to happen from a talking head on cable, I can promise you that. If we save the Republic, it's going to be because you and I in our local communities work on the bonds of affection. That is really hard work. It's not sentimental work. It takes a skill set that many of us don't have, but we need to develop. We need to get good at this. So I'm here to say, for all patriots, you want to preserve and defend the Constitution, so do I. I've taken an oath to do so. Many of you have done the same. The way to do that now is to work on our bonds of affection. Can it be done? Can it be done? I hope so. I pray so. I leave you with the words of Václav Havel. The young people here may not recognize that name, but for the older folks among us will recognize the name of Václav Havel, the Czech playwright who was instrumental in ending communist rule in Czechoslovakia. A great hero of freedom and patriotism, great Czech patriot and hero of freedom, who wrote, "Anyone who claims that I am a dreamer who expects to transform hell into heaven is wrong. I have few illusions," wrote Havel, "but I feel a responsibility to work towards the things I consider good and right. I don't know whether I'll be able to change certain things for the better or not at all. Both outcomes are possible. There is only one thing I will not concede, that it might be meaningless to strive in a good cause. It's my hope for all of us that we will strive in a good cause. And the good cause is to preserve the Constitution by nurturing and strengthening our bonds of affection for those who see the world differently than we do. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Judge Griffith, for your outstanding keynote, and we look forward to continuing the conversation now. It's time to welcome our panelists to the stage. I'll start with Lord Dr. Michael Hastings of Scarisbrick CBE. Lord Hastings brings a truly global perspective and a wealth of experience to our gathering. He serves as an independent peer in the UK House of Lords and imparts invaluable leadership insights as a professor at the Stephen R. Covey Center at Utah State University's Huntsman School of Business. His dedication to education and public service is evident in his role as chairman of SOAS University London and his past tenure as Chancellor of Regent's University London. Lord Hastings' career is marked by a deep commitment to social justice and community development. His tireless advocacy has been recognized with numerous honors, including a CBE, or Commander of the British Empire, for his contributions to crime reduction, and a UNICEF Global Award for his dedicated work supporting children in Africa. He was also the inaugural recipient of USU's Stephen R. Covey Principle-Centered Leadership Award in 2019, a testament to his exceptional leadership. Dr. Jeannie Johnson is a distinguished scholar and practitioner in the field of national security. She refers to herself as a pracademic, I learned last night. Dr. Johnson is a professor of political science at Utah State University and serves as the director of USU's Center for Anticipatory Intelligence. Her academic work delves deeply into strategic culture and its profound influence on security policy, intelligence operations, and military strategies. This expertise is not merely theoretical, it is grounded in real-world experience. Dr. Johnson served with distinction in the CIA's Directorate of Intelligence and with the U.S. State Department, bringing invaluable firsthand knowledge to her scholarship. To guide our discussion this afternoon, we have a truly exceptional moderator, Dr. Joe Ward. Dr. Ward serves as the Dean of the College of Humanities and Social Sciences at Utah State University, where he brings a wealth of academic leadership and scholarly expertise. He is a member of the steering committee for this event. As a distinguished historian specializing in 16th and 17th century England, Dr. Ward has made significant contributions to our understanding of that era. He has authored or edited 8 influential books, including Culture, Faith, and Philanthropy, and London, A Social and Cultural History, 1550 to 1750, demonstrating his deep knowledge and engaging writing style. Before I turn the time over to Dean Ward, I want to express my thanks to many of you who submitted questions through the website QR code, which I've been told will guide today's panel discussion. So please, let's give a warm welcome to our panelists and Dean Ward.
Thank you, one and all. I was very impressed by the thoughtful questions received, and they largely arranged themselves in a few key areas. So let's get started, and Judge Griffith, maybe we'll begin with you. Trust in democratic institutions has declined in recent years. What role do you see for the judiciary in restoring public confidence in the rule of law in our system of government? And if you'll begin, then we'll hear from our other panelists.
So the level of trust in the American judiciary is lower than it's been, I think, since they've been recording. It's down to the 30% range or so. I think that's unfortunate. I think that's largely the result of politicians criticizing the judiciary. I'm certain there's mistakes the judiciary's made. It's not perfect. What I will say to that is what Justice Barrett says to the criticism that judges are partisan hacks. She said, if you think we're partisan hacks, read our opinions. No, read the opinions. Now, there's a problem with that bit of advice. They're really long. And I've told her this. Why don't you just shorten it up a bit? But if you read their opinions, and I know we don't have time to do this, but if you read their opinions, instead of relying on what media outlets are telling you, what you will see is you may disagree with the opinion that's being written. But I know what you'll see is good people wrestling with difficult issues, difficult legal issues, and trying to come to the right result as they think is required by the Constitution. So that's a tough assignment. I didn't put that in. I said say nice things about the judiciary. That's a harder thing. What I didn't tell you is the best way to do that is do something really hard and read their opinions, right? But I think that unfortunately is the antidote. So I wish more reporters would do that, and I wish they would stop labeling judges by the president who appointed them, and I think report more accurately on what's actually going on in the courts. So.
Professor Johnson, the role of the judiciary.
Well, it sounds like they need to take my course so they can learn concise writing. That's what's occurring to me. But really,
can I give them your email
yeah,
address? Okay, great.
But really, in a more, reflecting on that idea seriously, you have a ways to catch up with how low the intelligence community, favorability ratings are. But figuring out a way to tell your own story as an institution. Institutions haven't typically been good at that. Certainly, it's not been seen as part of role for the judiciary. So to think in terms of how can I, reduce this long opinion to something digestible by the American public so that at least those who are out there seeking find it accessible. Yeah. And that's something even more difficult for the intelligence community because we haven't really been given a voice with the public in prior eras, but maybe that's something that we need to think about as well.
I made reference to this experience with Justice Sotomayor and Justice Barrett from the National Governors Association. If you're a real glutton for punishment, you can go online and watch it. But the response to by the governors, was striking. Mm-hmm. It was a spontaneous, prolonged standing ovation because I think they just didn't have any idea that Sonia Sotomayor and Amy Coney Barrett, even though they disagree with one another, don't question each other's faith, good faith. They just see each other as we have different views about this, but we can be colleagues and we can be friends and we can respect for one another. I think the governors, it was like they had no idea that that's the reality of the situation. So,
let me give you an example where I think it's been brilliant in our case in the UK and where it's not been. So. We had a prime minister some while ago called Boris Johnson, and many of you might remember him with a hairdo much like a mop. And he was very keen on the pursuit of Brexit, so we should leave the European Union. And Parliament was being contentious, which is what we're meant to be about it, and question hard and demand solid answers rather than just assumptions. So Boris Johnson wanted to persuade Her Majesty the Queen that maybe Parliament was being a bit too noisy and there was a need for a bit of a long break, which was going to be like a 6 to 7 week break, which is not really acceptable. And that happened. And a wonderful lady decided, in fact, a lady from the Caribbean, decided this was unacceptable and took the case to the Supreme Court in Westminster. And the Supreme Court, within 24 hours, had Parliament re-established, said the Prime Minister had acted outside of the law and had to apologize to the Queen. And so was it not for the authority and significance of the Supreme Court and those judges, we would have had a very manipulative and, dare I even say, semi-deceitful outcome. So thank goodness for judges' integrity. And then we've had this very difficult case recently where 900 individuals have faced prosecutions and charges, and 200 have gone to prison over an action of a Japanese company that installed some software into post offices. And the software caused the accounting at the end of every day to be incorrect. So these postmasters were being told they've deposited so much money, but it's not right. They need to put more money in. And this led to 900 prosecutions. And the question we asked in Parliament was, why did no judge question that? Because if you have 900 cases from all over the country about the same issue, you have to think, is everybody being deceitful? Why did no judge raise their voice to question it? So I think we're in this fine balance where we need people of huge intelligence and integrity, but we need them to be prepared to stand up and stand out, which of course is exactly what is, to some extent, happening at the moment.
Thank you. Professor Johnson, I think we'll maybe have you begin this next question. The Constitution was designed to balance competing interests through negotiation and compromise. Has our modern political discourse strayed from these principles? And if so, how can we realign with them?
I thought Judge Griffith did such an amazing job of tackling that topic, and your label of affective polarization just captured the pith of the worry that we all have, the reason that we showed up here today. And one of the things that we've been discussing a lot, both within my discipline and certainly with students, and I know, I can see Claire and others who teach this in their courses, is understanding, especially in politics, but really also in your roommate situations and in all situations, that often it's not a decision between right and wrong. The decisions are between different packages of trade-offs. And if we could get back to thinking that way about each other, even when you're looking at a package of trade-offs that you really don't understand or you think are steeply on the other side of where you would prefer, if you think about it as a package of trade-offs, it helps sort of siphon off that anger and contempt for each other, and you start to see a wider picture about why that group or that person may be pursuing the policy that they are pursuing. Now, we know from our colleagues in psychology that in order to do this very well, you have to figure out a way to reduce your own internal anger, because anger impacts our brains in a way that it absolutely narrows our band of thinking, narrows our aperture in creative problem solving, and even being able to see another person holistically. So part of it starts with just our internal self, and then just switching the mindset to see political decisions, neighborhood decisions, university decisions as packages of trade-offs instead of along always a moral scale.
I think that's such a powerful point, that what anger does, and you were right, Judge Griffith, to point out that people's obsession with cable news and therefore the repeated distortion of opinion and thinking, which is just continuous, and the sense of panic, breaking news, panic, panic, panic. And so it sort of fires you up, and all the crazy endorphins and adrenaline is getting going inside. So you become tense and angry, and therefore your reactions are not based on perspective or thinking about them historically, or even considering, well, why don't I go and learn something about that? Instead, it becomes, let me press the buzzer called no, 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 no. And that is the way we're being wired. Our phones are doing it, our televisions are doing it, social media is doing it, and now neighborhoods are doing it.
You know, Jeff Rosen, who's the president of the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia, and by the way, let me give them a plug. If you want to get up to speed on the constitutional issues that are facing our country today, right now, you read everything that comes out of the National Constitution Center. They have the best scholars. It's nonpartisan. They work real hard at every argument. You see the both sides of every argument. They're just a national treasure. Jeff wrote a book this last year. It's called The Pursuit of Happiness. And what he does is he identifies that the framers of the American Constitution were preeminently concerned with character, that character was the key to everything. And so I don't think you can have a discussion like this, particularly about what are you and I supposed to do, without being very introspective about it and saying, well, what am I doing? My favorite quote, one of my favorite quotes comes from Oliver Cromwell, the Puritan revolutionary. I don't know how you feel about Cromwell, but anyway.
I pass the statue every day.
Okay, because, he was speaking in a Christian idiom, so account for that. He said, I beseech ye in the bowels of Christ, think that ye might be mistaken. The greatest judge who never served on the Supreme Court was a man named Learned Hand. Isn't that a great name? Wouldn't you? Learned Hand. And Judge Hand, back in the 1930s or 40s, gave a speech in Central Park in America. It's a classic speech called The Spirit of Liberty. And he begins with that quote. And he says, that phrase, I beseech you that you think that you might be mistaken, he said, ought to be emblazoned over every state house, every courthouse, every school, every church, every home. Start with, I might be wrong.
Yeah.
Yes.
I might be wrong. I don't think I am, but I might be wrong, but let me listen. It sounds like we're giving a Sunday school lesson now, but I think that's where we are. These are moral issues at base. What type of person do we want to be to preserve this community, this democracy? And it comes down to character counts. So,
I was always going to say to you, Judge, how do you feel we should learn that Cromwell-type character?
Yeah.
Where should we learn it?
Well, it's the institutions, right? The institution of the family, the church, the schools. It's got to happen there. I wish it would come from our leaders, our national leaders. No comment. I wish it would, but I don't think we can wait for that. So it's the institutions. Now the institutions aren't doing well, right? They aren't doing well. But in the past, that's what we've relied upon. So there needs to be a recommitment to those institutions as a source of these virtues, and schools, civic education, that sort of thing. Yeah.
Well, I want to make a plug for Gen Z because they already do this really well. So
I still don't like your music, but
in some ways, the adults need to get out of the way. Gen Z, I know, clap for yourselves. Yeah. I have seen you go out of your way to take care of each other, to look for compromise, to work harder to understand the whole person, to quickly forgive. When you said 90% of America is tired of this, they are who I thought about first. Okay. And so I think there's a piece of this where we think we have to retrain it. I think we just have to start living it, as adults. And model it, certainly, and show what it looks like in careers and in adulthood. But they're there. They're interested in behaving this way. We just need to tone down the complaining, the biting that we are doing to each other and give them the room to express it.
Do you think we should, as universities, encourage, because we have a system in Oxford and Cambridge of those very vivid debates, and those vivid debates can be divisive, but actually they never really are, because the whole aim is you come to find out things you do not know and to listen to people you never ever met before so you can learn. Yeah. And that then causes a long dinner process which follows afterwards for hours and hours and hours, where everybody can share their thinking. And do you think we need to do that more?
No, I love that plan.
Yeah.
No, I love that plan.
We'll give it to you.
Thank you. I hope it doesn't turn out like question time in Parliament, though. I will say that.
Well, but Lord Hastings, you've anticipated one of the questions that we received from the community. So let's build on that a little bit. We are here at Utah State University. How can universities in institutions of higher learning contribute to depolarization and encourage civil discourse grounded in constitutional principles?
Well, one of the things that I have the joy of doing for the Huntsman School is receiving students from Utah State in London. And I had a group a few weeks ago, and there's going to be another group in a couple of weeks' time. And when I receive them, and they're traveling around, they're going somewhere else, or onto Spain, or they're going onto another country, they're gaining insight by being international. And universities have a hugely important role to broaden the mind. Whatever somebody's major is fine. But there's a whole lot of expertise and experience and adventure and difference that is needing to be looked at and understood. And so I feel we have a hugely important role to help students to see a world they don't understand, to meet with people they may not instinctively feel comfortable with, to discover somebody else by hearing their heartbeat as compared to looking at their position. So discovering each other is a really important part of this growth. And we all need it. I mean, for goodness sakes, we need it into our 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, as much as students do in their 20s and 30s. So I'm all for that.
And I want to double down on that. I think colleges and universities are the most important component to do that. It's a perfect place to do this. You bring people from all over the state, all over the country, all over the world. They live together in the same space, and they should learn how to disagree with each other respectfully and how to listen. President of Biola University made a comment recently that I'll bungle it, but it was very clever. He said, you know, I want all of my students to learn to be student activists, you know, but after 4 years of sitting down at a table and listening to other people's views.
Yes.
In other words, he was saying, hold off your activism for just a little bit, but at college is a time to sit down and to learn from other people. And I have to tell you, from what I know about what's going on at Utah State, this is a great place that's doing that in a really significant way. And more power to you. Keep going, because it's sorely needed in American higher education. Because I think this is the perfect place to train people in those skills and habits of mind that will lead them to respect others even though they disagree with them.
One of the most interesting places to visit, which I've been to 5 times, is Jerusalem. And in Jerusalem, around the little old streets, you will still see your very traditional rabbi-looking Jewish gentleman sitting, smoking a cigarette probably, and having a strong coffee with a Palestinian, somebody from the West Bank or from the Gaza area, because that has been the tradition for literally thousands of years, and they still do it. And the picture that you get from the media is that cannot possibly happen. Everybody is bitter and acrimonious and against each other. You can have strong opinions, and they do, but share them with generosity over a good drink together and discover how to think about the other person's perspective. Now, it doesn't prevent wars and conflict, but it does show that it is possible to be equally human.
I want to provide a shout out to our social work department and our criminal justice department in our college, because one of the things I've been so impressed with across this last year is, you know, that pracademic title that you saw me celebrate of being part practitioner, part academic. I think is really important for us in the university community to have these discussions, to have those exceptional experiences, and then go back into our own communities.
Yes.
And social work and criminal justice are both really demonstrating excellence in that in our college. But until you are back in the community, sitting down with someone who you actually disagree with or who you know nothing about, and you really don't understand their lives very well, and you're hearing that and bringing your tools to bear on that situation, learning from them, I think it will be hard to heal this divide because, as we all know, from examining the polling data and statistically, much of the divide exists between college communities and non-higher ed communities. And so figuring a way to bridge those and doing it intentionally and rewarding it in our higher institutions, so that that kind of outreach becomes a part of role and becomes an expectation that students have of themselves as well. That's where higher ed can engage in actual healing.
Well, we have just a brief time left, and I wonder if I can ask each of the panelists for a closing thought, a takeaway for our community. Lord Hastings, let's begin with you.
You know, it would be very easy to say that this is almost like a naive ambition, this is a crazy dream, or it's going backwards to come away from divisiveness. It's actually going forwards, because we're going to end up demolishing ourselves and one another simply by relentless accusation and division. What all of us want as we get on in life, ultimately, is a little bit of peace, harmony, and love, and affection and support, and the door to close and someone not to knock it down. And so this is really a vision for what the good society feels like again. You know, what was intended in the Constitution is that communities of difference learn, know, and treasure and abide with each other. That is the deep desire of my heart, that we can make it work because we want to.
Thank you, Professor Johnson.
I want to pick up on the same love theme. We coordinated our colors.
Quite deliberately.
I don't know if you noticed that. But I want to pick up on the same love theme. And if you haven't read it, Chad Ford has a great book called Dangerous Love. And I want to take the concept that he uses in his book and actually apply it to the country. As someone who is, you know, if you had to peg me on a board, center left, you know, I recognize that my community has shied away from continuing to express verbally and express through activity love of country, because that has come to feel tainted by some on the left. And we have to love this experiment that we're in together in order to take the actions necessary to heal it. You have to admit love for it, you have to engage in love for it, and it can feel a little dangerous, right? Because you might be misidentified in some way. So it might feel a little dangerous to you, but until we step into sort of dangerous love space, we can't accomplish real healing.
Over a third of the Federalist Papers identify the greatest danger the framers thought that existed for our Constitution. And it was something they called faction. It's what we would call hyperpartisanship. They thought that was the greatest danger to the Constitution. So the question for all of us is, am I contributing to that? Am I hyperpartisan? And if you are, repent. It's not good. Don't do that. I want to give credit. Much of my thinking about this hard work of peacemaking comes from people at Utah State, comes from Patrick Mason and Chad Ford. Their scholarship and writing has been transformative in my thinking. And so I want to give a challenge to all of us to do something simple. Invite to dinner or to coffee or to breakfast or what, somebody who just views the word completely differently than you do, and go to that time and just listen. Yeah. Don't try and persuade them, but just listen. And I think what you will discover is that while you disagree with that person's views, that's a real human being who has concerns that are every bit as valid as you. They may be scared, but just try to understand. And that's the beginning. If we don't do that, if we don't take that step to try and understand our fellow citizens, it's not going to work. Right. But I have confidence that we can do that, and I have hope in the rising generation that you care about this and will do this, and I applaud.
With their music.
No, let's talk about your music separately, okay? Talk about your music separately. And I'm grateful to Utah State for the leadership you're displaying in this. And you students who are here are fortunate to be here at this place and this time with these people. So press forward.
And I feel very fortunate to have been here this afternoon. I feel better informed, I feel inspired, and I feel challenged to do the difficult work ahead of us. So please join me in thanking Judge Griffith and our other panelists.
like to thank our panelists again very much for sharing their wisdom and leadership. Could we give them one more round of applause, please? That was tremendous. We have another slide because students have an opportunity today. Can we advance the slide, please? Super. You have a special encore invitation today, a student forum featuring Judge Griffith and Lord Hastings. I believe will be held at Huntsman School at 5 p.m. The event provides a unique opportunity to directly interact and inquire. Details will be found outside the auditorium, so please take a look out during our event in the lobby. I hope that you will stay around to engage with our speakers and with one another today. And finally, to close out today's event, I'd like to invite Matt White, our Vice President of Advancement, to the podium. And thank you again for coming today.
You like hearing from the fundraiser last, right? Thank you again for attending today's forum on conflict and conflict transformation at Utah State University, and for your invaluable support. Signature events like these play a crucial role in enriching our university and strengthening our community. I hope you know that your participation and engagement contribute to meaningful opportunities for our students, as well as our faculty, staff, and broader community. If this event resonated with you, I invite you to make a financial contribution to help sponsor future events like this one. Your generosity enables us to continue to hosting impactful events that foster growth, learning, and collaboration. Every donation makes a difference. There's a QR code up on the screen if you'd like to learn more. And your support helps Utah State University fulfill our mission to empower all individuals to lead lives of involvement, innovation, as well as impact. Your generosity fuels opportunities that enrich our university and community. We appreciate you attending today. Look forward to seeing you at the reception, and go Aggies.